Hello, YouTube. Today I'm taking a look at Star Citizen essentially 2 years after the initial release of Arena Commander to backers, and looking at where things are today and where they stand. And I can't help but feel a little bit kind of disappointed because I would have expected more things to have been done right. And I've just witnessed over the past 2 years a continual disregard for getting the devil in the details done to an acceptable level. They seem to be content to let things fester along for months and years at a time instead of going forward and addressing those and building upon successful iterations to deliver upon a product that could be so much more right now than what is shown. They've gone for the nth degree when it comes to the visual aspects of the game. They have not put forth that same level of effort when it comes to things like controls and basic gameplay, essentially. And while it's pretty to look at, the underlying poor gameplay mechanics are just unacceptable because it didn't have to be this way. Out of a staff of however many they've got now, over several hundred, and not including contractors and things of that nature, you can't tell me that you didn't have one person whose job responsibility, at least 50% of the time, was trying to implement and iterate upon the controller schemes, including functions that should be pretty basic, things that were discussed in the 2013 December live stream, where they had the X55 prototype, and one of the developers, I believe who is still there, even was like, oh, look at this little rotary dial. We can use that to select the missile that you want to fire. Unfortunately, 2 years after the release of Arena Commander version 0.8, we still cannot select which missile we want to fire when, making the loadout of multiple missiles to engage the right type of missile against the right target at the right time a level of gameplay that is completely absent from the game worlds right now, including both the universe as well as Arena Commander itself. We've had the ability to toggle which countermeasure we wish to deploy, but we have no way of selecting which missile we actually want to deploy against a target if you're flying a ship like the Gladiator, or now the Freelancer or Constellation that's been added in this last 6 or 7 months. And the fact of the matter is, the Gladiator has been around flight ready for over a year at this point, and this would have seemed to me to be one of those critical features that was truly needed at that time. Now, I understand there is kind of a way that you can do it via turning on and off various weapon groups, the power to them, but that's clunky and not exactly ideal in the middle of a combat situation in the universe or in a Arena Commander. So you're stuck with a situation where if you're flying a Gladiator in particular, and let's say 1 minute you're engaging a Hornet and you want to fire off a dogfighting missile, and the next minute you're sitting on engaging a Constellation, you want to be able to choose between your size 1 and 2 and size 5 missiles. You want to fire the size 1 and 2s at dogfighting targets. You want to fire that size 5 at a larger target like a Tally or a Connie. But we can't. I would love to be able to load a mixed armament of weapons, EM missiles, IR missiles, and CS missiles, and then choose which one is most appropriate for the target that I'm fighting. Shooting a CS missile at a Saber is usually a fool's errand, whereas shooting an EM missile at a Saber tends to go a little bit better because they have a higher EM signature than they do cross-section. I understand that things are placeholders, but we can't even utilize and see how well those basic mechanics work because lacks the features to do so. Other things, like the fact that the tutorial mission has been broken for 9-10 months at this point throughout multiple iterations or multiple patches. And this is many people's first experience into the game world, and instead of being a positive one to show them just the level of depth one could expect to experience come Squadron 42 to whet their appetite essentially, instead they're left oftentimes uninstalling it when they learn, oh, well, the mission's bugged, I can't complete the tutorial because the missiles don't work or whatnot. Well, if it's not working now, and wait, it's been broken for 6 months or 9 months or 10 months or whatever it's been at this juncture, then what confidence do I have that if they can't fix this now, that they're going to get their act together and fix it for Squadron 42, and that Squadron 42 is going to be anything but a hot, buggy mess. And that kind of leaves you back to if it's a hot, buggy mess, what happens to its impact on your player character going into the persistent universe if you die because of a bug or can't complete a mission or campaign because of a bug. This is where building the solid foundation would have been far more advantageous to have done it over the course of the past 2 years instead of oftentimes just getting it barely functional. Not even to an acceptable level, but just barely functional and then leaving it there. And this has been a pattern repeated way too often. Throughout just about anything and everything that you can talk about delivered up until this point. Now, White Knight will try to say it's alpha, it was pre-alpha, but frankly, those arguments began to wear thin over a year ago, or about a year ago at the very latest, when basically, okay, you've been saying this for the past 6 months, things haven't improved any. Basic things that we were asking for 6 months, a year ago, 18 months ago, still aren't there, like the ability to easily select which missile we want to fire. And the fact that they've not spent any effort or put forth any effort to solve these problems has just left me kind of scratching my head. I mean, I guess all of their priority is making it look pretty, but if it plays horribly, it's going to be no different than putting lipstick on a pig or makeup on a pig. It's still going to be a pig. It's as though they tried to build a foundation and pour a foundation, but they got their mixture of water and Portland cement and aggregate wrong. And instead of solidifying into a solid base, it's still a wet, sloppy, slurry mess that they're now trying to, they've put their poles for their deck or whatever else they're trying to build, or the house, and they've started to lay the first floor, and it's starting to sink, and cracks are forming, and they're scratching on going, well, you know what? We'll use the placeholders of duct tape and Band-Aids in order to fix it. Now, things like ship balance and weapons balance statistics and things like that at this juncture, I don't expect to be there. Even if code is unoptimized and I'm not getting 1,000 frames per second, that's okay. Server crashes, client crashes, expected to happen at this stage in development. That doesn't really bother me. But they get the little things, or they fail to do the little things, I guess is a better way of putting it. Examples. The missiles, the inability to complete the tutorial. Let's take a look at the Planetside module and features that were really needed to be there, such as being able to easily add players. You can add players from inside the game with the F11 menu, but whenever you click on the little box, you don't get a feedback icon to let you know that you've actually clicked there. Kind of UI, UX 101 type things. The backspace doesn't work, so if you make a mistake on somebody's moniker name, that you have to basically delete and start all over again, which is a pain in the butt, instead of being able to correct your mistakes. You don't have the ability to, say, go and easily add from the chat menu, friends list and following and things of that nature. Sometimes it seems like it works immediately. Other times it takes 15-20 minutes. I understand that with having to update multiple server-side databases and things of that nature with master-slave relationships. I've been around software development and databases and all that stuff for long enough that I understand where that's all coming from. But other games do it instantaneously. And 2 years later, even a year, and I guess not quite a year, let's say 9 months after the release, 10 months after the release of the Planetside module, those features have yet to be developed and included. And it just seems like they get things half-assed, barely functional, and then instead of working on successfully iterating upon that to get it up to an acceptable level, it doesn't have to be perfect. Not all of the features have to be here right now, but what is available just needs to work, and work well and consistently. And that just has never happened. And instead, it's, now we're on to the next thing. We didn't get all the Planetside social interaction features up to snuff, but we're going to start building the universe and releasing the universe on top of that. And it's just left me scratching my head. Because it boils back down to, if not now, when? We have a virtual joystick that looks like a maxi pad in terms of where it maneuvers your controls instead of being a round circle. Not to mention the whole ignoring controls overall. For essentially what we heard over about a year, it started coming up in March of 2014 with the controller versus controller Katamari began, when we saw freelancer-style control as opposed to a virtual joystick-oriented Wing Commander-style controls being put forth, and in the first year of iterations, year and a half of iterations of the game, that being the predominant design, and then host-ass joystick users basically having to play second fiddle, and their way of dealing with that is, well, let's just scale damages on an order of magnitude instead of looking at the fundamental underlying problems and then building, let's say, an acceptable virtual joystick from the get-go, and then let's honestly see what kind of buffs mouse and keyboard users need between a joystick and a mouse. And then you got your gamepad users that I really truly feel sorry for you guys, because as bad of an experience has been with joysticks and stuff like that, it's been an even worse experience with gamepad and for gamepad users. And then a year after that, we got the somewhat snarky top men comment from the controller roundtable video that didn't actually tell us put forth any solutions from CIG other than we have top men looking on this, who then bothered not to look at it for about another 6 months and took an organization founding called Parity to essentially call out the developers with videos on YouTube, put their feet to the fire to finally get some revisions made to the flight model that started to make the vehicular combat in the game start to make sense instead of more like flying around in a floating, cylinder. In fact, EVA in the game feels more like vehicular combat and flying a spaceship should feel like than it does actually flying the starships, flying the fighters and stuff like that. Feels like how EVAing should feel. I mean, it's almost as if they've gotten that completely bass-ackwards. So that's kind of where I stand at this point in time 2 years later, is I just keep seeing this pattern repeating over and over and over again. Every time they deliver things, it's never been up to par. And then they just go on to ignore it and try to build the next thing instead of going back and fixing it now. And I don't know, maybe they'll pull it all together in the next 6 months. But I've been waiting for 2 years, over 2 years at this point, for it to come together, and it still hasn't. And that is a little bit disconcerting at this juncture. I would have thought that they would be a lot farther along having these little minor things at an acceptable state. They don't have to be perfect. And again, after 2 years of playing Elite Dangerous, where Frontier doesn't always get it right, and you can legitimately criticize some of their decisions, and some of their subjective decisions you may not like, I may like, you may not. But the one thing you can't say is that when they do deliver something that, from a technical perspective, it generally has worked fairly well, whether it was flight mechanics and combat mechanics. Yeah, could trading be better, but it does work. They've started to introduce some crafting elements into the game, and while, again, it could be expanded upon and made better, it does work at a fundamental level. Their planetary landing mechanics worked in 2.0. Now in the 2.1, whenever I go back and look at it visually, 2.0 was kind of, it works, it's acceptable, it looks cool. Now it just looks amazing on the surface of planets. They've gone back and added that much more depth and detail because they've started with something that worked at an acceptable level and then successfully iterated upon that. Yes, they've gotten some things wrong with how people play the game to min-max and all that good stuff, but their foundation was solid enough that they could rebuild those rooms and rearrange those rooms within the house. Star Citizen is not starting with that same foundation. Well, be sure to leave your comments in the section below, like, subscribe, all of that fun stuff. I'll see you in the verse.